This is Sam Long.
I'm John Nugent.
And I am Ron Peters.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. When this episode drops, the school as a whole will be on our week of outreach, with a second opportunity for students to either get involved in service-oriented activities or take a spring break or just a general break. And so when that happens, where will you all be and what will you all be doing?
I will probably take at least one day off where I'm just going to get away and not even think about work. But honestly, I've got a lot of backed up stuff that I haven't looked at, and it needs my attention. So I'll be in the office a little bit doing non-teaching duties.
Sorry to hear you're backed up.
I'm going to stop.
They've got pills for that.
I want to comment on that, but I'm going to keep it family friendly, so I'm not going to do that.
I will also be local, and I will probably be working the entire time because there's a lot going on.
Yes, there is. There is a lot.
And I need the space to get caught up enough so that the rest of my school year can be logistically possible.
Yeah.
So, but I'll probably work from home more than in the office. I'll be less
You can actually get stuff done there.
And a lot more productive.
Yeah, I feel that.
What's funny is I am not productive at home. That is the most distracting place for me. If I want to be productive, I should just go sit in a coffee shop because I am more productive in a coffee shop than any other place. So
That'll be part of my rotation. I will be moving around. 'Cause you're right. The same spot to me kind of gets, I don't know, it gets old. I can't continue to be productive in the same spot. So I got to mix it up.
Move around.
And, I guess, should I introduce Todd for this part?
Since you've
We're
already
going to allow Todd to participate in it?
Right.
Just lurking.
Is
over
he
here.
still here? Oh,
We're going around the circle here, and Todd is next. In case you didn't listen to last week's episode, Todd is joining us, a professor at Great Lakes Christian College.
Yay.
Todd Jones. He's providing the leadership for the theme of this series of spiritual disciplines, and we want to hear what you're going to be doing next week, Todd.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not introducing much variety here. I'm also going to be working the entire time, but I'm more on the Ron side. I guess maybe I'm my own unique person because my most productive place is actually my office. There's something about that space and the way that it's designed that just gets me working. And then when I leave that space, I'm doing other things. So, working from home, not an option with a toddler. They are unwilling to let you be in a room that they're not in. So, I have to be here if I want to get anything done.
Yep, I agree.
when you said you were like Ron, I didn't know if you were backed up also. But,
And there it is.
Yeah.
This is my fault. I apologize to the listeners.
Yeah.
You can't tee Sam up like that.
Yeah. I'm actually doing something fun. I'm going to be in sunny South Carolina. I'm taking our disc golf team to the college national championships. So we'll be down there. They'll be playing. I'll be walking a lot and watching. So it's supposed to be really nice weather-wise. And, we'll see how it goes. We'll be competing against all the other schools in the country. So even though we're in a particular division conference for most of our sports, disc golf is still club across the board. So we're be playing every school you can think of. All the big schools. They're like in the basketball national championship now. We're playing them in disc golf, and so it'll be fun.
Wow.
Yep.
So because we're club, are you playing as part of the
I'm
team?
not allowed to play. You do have to take 6 credits a semester and be enrolled in a program and those sorts of things. We've tried to find ways around it, but they don't. It doesn't work. So.
Well, go Aliens.
Go
Let's
Aliens.
make this happen.
That's right. We'll see what we can do. That's a whole other thing. Go ahead.
Assassin update. Are you still alive?
I'm not alive.
Okay. I died yesterday.
Yeah, I saw both you guys were out now.
It was awful. And Sam kind of helped my
eased him
my
into his
assassin.
demise.
He was the midwife. But, no, you're like the Kevorkian, kind of like gently.
Wow. I've been called a lot of things in my day.
Hot off the presses, topical
Kevorkian,
reference.
this is a new one. I like it.
I don't hate it.
All right, so that's spring break or week of outreach.
Week of outreach, yep.
Which it seems like we're all doing more of the relaxing, rejuvenating, get caught up kind of thing. But you're getting to travel at least. It's quasi work.
I'll have plenty of things to do in our downtime, so don't worry about that.
Yeah,
Sounds
All right.
good.
Well, we're continuing our series on spiritual disciplines. We anticipate this is going to be 12 or 13 episodes. And Todd Jones is providing our leadership. And you may have noticed that for this series, we've updated our after-class logo.
That's right.
So if you haven't looked at it, I don't know where. I mean, Sam's going to figure out the best place to put it. But we've Elijah Cott, who does our artwork for us, has managed to redo the classic circular logo with the three faces with the glasses to incorporate a fourth face, Todd. Since you're with us for so much, we figured we need a commemorative after class logo that has you on it. So
A
check
coin
it out.
will be minted.
Oh my.
Yeah, check it out, and we'll see if we make stickers for this one.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
Maybe a Todd challenge coin, you know.
Okay.
But I think the stickers would be great because if it's only a short-term thing and if we go back to the three faces, then there's going to be some value to this, the limited edition
You have to
after
number
class
them.
four-face
Yep.
sticker.
So much value.
I know people are going to be clamoring for it. So I think I think we should do it.
All right. Well, there's an idea. Maybe we can get Todd on it.
Idea.
It's one of the all-time ideas, indeed.
Todd's like, wait a second.
I'm like, I see how this is working. Okay.
The newest guy. But today we're continuing our journey on spiritual disciplines, and we're talking about the topic of prayer. And just by way of information, we've already done a 10-part series on prayer in season 5. This is not that. This is not like a full theology of prayer, walking through all the verses like we normally do. We're talking about the practice of prayer as a spiritual discipline, which kind of limits our focus and kind of focuses our conversation. So just keep that in mind with this episode. If you want to hear more of the typical after-class walk through all the passages, season 5, you got plenty of episodes. Take it away, Todd.
Yeah, and by way of reminder, also, we're allowing Richard Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline, to sort of guide our outline. He's not going to feature as heavily in future episodes as he did in the first one, but maybe each time we'll end up providing Foster's definition, use that as kind of a springboard. I've also got the Todd definition, as I jokingly call it in class, where I try and make it as simple and direct as possible. And then from there, we'll have some scriptures to dive into and all of that. One more comment on Foster's organizational structure. He puts prayer in the internal disciplines category. Moving from meditation to prayer has a very natural flow, and then we'll continue proceeding through them. I don't know if we want to spoil what comes next, but he's got 4 internal disciplines, and so when he's imagining prayer, he's imagining the act of an individual doing something as a personal discipline, not to tread on his definition. But I guess we're there, so let's go ahead and talk about what his definition is. Foster defines prayer broadly as a central spiritual discipline that allows people to connect with God, which is wildly vague.
Yep.
That is, yeah. Seems like we could do more to specify that. So appreciate that, Foster, but it seems like it needs a little touch-up, without a doubt.
I've attempted a touch-up that's equally vague, but hopefully a little bit more helpful.
Todd, improve upon that for us, if you would, please.
I'll certainly try. I have defined prayer in class and throughout most of my Christian walk as communication with God. Communication with God. Broadly, again, that's a very general principle, but it includes a couple things, or sort of denotes a couple things. First being that communication is a two-way street. Prayer is not limited to the things that we are offering in communication. It's also ideally that we're receiving something. Communication, hopefully, again, communicates the idea of dialogue. And then again, just as meditation is thinking on purpose, prayer is communicating on purpose. So it's not as though God is not aware of the sorts of things that we're thinking and experiencing all the time, but prayer is that point at which you have decided, now I'm directing this at God for God to hear, sort of in scare quotes, hear, for God to notice. I'm trying to offer communication to God, and in the act of trying, you are succeeding. You are praying now. So I guess, let's begin there. Maybe you can react to those definitions, or what comes to your minds when you think about the spiritual discipline of prayer?
When you use the 2 C words, communication and connection, but really it's conversation, right? Because that's the two-way part of it. And that's how I've always heard it framed in churches and things like that. It's a conversation with God. And of course, then they have the caveat, well, you don't necessarily hear God respond. But nonetheless, it's a two-way conversation with God. Like, okay. And so for me, just general experience, it's yes, I'm expressing various things to God with the expectation that God's hearing.
Yeah. And I like what you said, because the word I like to use with people is the one you used, Todd. It's this idea of opening up a dialogue with God. I think there are a lot of people who want to treat prayer almost as if it's like a magical incantation. Like if I pray right or say the right words, then what I'm praying for will happen. And then there's disappointment when things don't happen the way you expected them to. And so the idea is that we would open up a dialogue with God where we not only bring our request to him, which he has told us to do, But we listen and say, okay, God, what is your response? I have brought my request to you, but what do you have to say in return? Are you saying, good idea? Are you saying, well, have you thought about this? And so that idea of a dialogue with God, I think, is an important way of thinking about how prayer functions for us.
So I guess my question about that definition. So in the early church in Acts, you have the apostles are facing this issue with the early church where certain widows are not being taken care of, right? And they need to appoint certain people filled with the Spirit to tend to the distribution of food so they can be devoted to the word, service of the word, and to prayer. Do you think the prayer there is the prayer that we're talking about in terms of prayer as a spiritual discipline, or do you think something else is going on there?
Short answer, I think it's a both and hopefully that's not frustrating to do that too often, that it's sort of like, yeah, it's in the middle or whatever. My definition for prayer is meant to be as inclusive as possible for all of the ways that a person might communicate with God. And I would want to lump all of those under the category or under the umbrella, of prayer. And so it seems like some of what's going on with that specific instance might be lumped into a subcategory that lives below the umbrella category that is something like intercessory prayer, or something like the intentional communication that's directed at God, that's designed to get God to act in a particular way, that avoids the spell casting analogy that Ron used earlier. It avoids the vending machine, I press G4 and the Snickers falls down. Hopefully we're avoiding the sense that we're telling God what to do and God has to listen to us because we're like giving God instructions. But there is a sense where in the partnership that we're invited to have with God, God considers our viewpoint. You covered this at length in the prayer series from, a couple, I was going to say generations ago, seasons ago.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's not quite right. You guys aren't that much older than me. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So the particular kind of prayer there, I think, lives in that specific, almost, there's an expectation that the church would be doing this work as a group. At some point, the church is going to be offering almost formalized prayers that are intercessory in nature, or that are designed to invite on behalf of the church, invite God to take a particular action or to address a particular problem. And so that is under the umbrella. I would call that communication with God the same way that I would call it communication with my son when I tell him to go do something, or when I ask him about how his day is. Both of those are communication, but in one case I have different expectations about what's occurring.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'd want to change the definition at all in light of that. I think, to me, one of the things that at least is expressed there and is a central feature of prayer as spiritual discipline would just be it's a recognition that we depend on God. So for the apostles, it's not by their strength that they're leading the church. They are inadequate to this task. They need the Spirit's empowerment. They need God's input on what they're doing. They need to submit their plans to Him. So there's something about dependence upon God, and I don't know if it would need to work into the definition, but I think it's a presupposition of it that the very act is an expression. I'm communicating with God because I depend on Him utterly for my spiritual life and my whole life. So I don't know. That passage brings that to the table for me in a profound way, and I don't know. I haven't vetted that past all the instances of prayer to know if there's an instance where that's not the case, but I think there's something important there.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, because a lot of times the conversational model is used. Well, when we have conversations, I don't depend on Ron for a whole lot. For some things, maybe,
Right.
but not like my whole life in existence. So then the metaphor breaks down, right? Because I think you bring up a really good point that it's not just a conversation between two parties. It's a dialogue between an inferior and a superior, between the life giver and the life receiver, and that's a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, the Bible often uses this idea of God being our king. And so we are the subjects of his kingdom, and we're going to him in that capacity. So, Sam, I think you bring up a really good point, that it's not two equals having a conversation, but we should see it as us going to our king and opening up a dialogue with him. And I think that helps to frame the conversation in a way that more accurately captures what it is to have a conversation with God.
Yeah. And so maybe that, for your communication with God, maybe the with God implies that, right? Rather, with having it with Ron would be something different, or communicating with my daughter or, my grandchild.
Yeah.
like the with whom, I guess, does shape the nature of the conversation.
Yeah.
But the communication, if prayer is communication with God uniquely, then that relationship of us as his servants and who need him desperately for every fiber of our being is built into the with God.
Yeah, and at the risk of maybe skipping ahead a little, there is also the notion that we express when we feel like that dependence isn't being rewarded or that dependence isn't being reciprocated. God is pretty consistent in God's approach to humanity, saying, I will respond to you in these ways, like faithfulness creates, I am faithful enough for the both of us is kind of God's starting point, right? But then there's covenant initiated, and if the humans maintain covenant, then God will respond according to the terms of that covenant. And then the humans are having in their finite perception an experience that seems to violate that covenant. And so they pray. The response to that is to pray and to say to God, I don't think you're doing what you said you're going to do.
Where are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I expected you here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And in that case, it's not an expression of dependence. It is a communication with God, but it does respect all of those things that you pointed out about the unequalness of the relationship. There's almost a sense that a child is going to their parent saying, you said you'd protect me and I got hurt over here. What's going on and how are you going to fix this?
Good analogy. I like that.
Yeah. Which I think preserves the dependence. I need you and you're not here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point.
It reinforces that dependence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I expected you and you're not. I'm dependent on you, but you weren't there.
Cool. We can start with that.
Sure. Well, do you have, I mentioned before we hit record, we've got a couple of routes that this can go. Do we have a preference between the priority that I placed? I'm going to point at the middle of the table where the listeners can't see, between going here or going here first?
You lead us.
Okay, let's get into
You're in
it.
charge, man.
So Romans 8, beginning in verse 26, expresses what I'm calling the what is going on in biblical prayer passage, like what exactly is occurring as a person is choosing to communicate with God, because there is spiritual reality to that communication that is happening that the Bible, I believe, states pretty explicitly in this passage, but we need to establish that framework to understand what it is we're even doing before we talk about like how to do it right or anything beyond that. Does anybody want to read the?
I'll read. We have a system.
We have a system. Let's stick with
Usually starts with Sam.
Okay.
So Romans 8, verse 26, likewise the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we don't know how to pray as we ought, but that very Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words. And God, who searches the heart, knows what is in the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. And then jumping down to verse 34, who is to condemn? It is Christ Jesus, who died, yes, who was raised, who is at the right hand of the God, who indeed intercedes for us.
So I guess not to steal the thunder, but just the reason that I think that this is such an important passage is it points out the what again I'll call the cosmic reality that prayer is joining into a conversation that's already occurring. The Trinity is having a conversation among itself. The Spirit is groaning with something that's too deep for words, while the Son is sitting at the right hand of the Father, also having a conversation with the Father. And the Father claims to have perfect understanding of what the Spirit is groaning about. So there is this sort of three-part conversation that's already happening. So as a spiritual discipline, when we enter prayer, we are joining into a conversation that's already occurring.
Okay. So you framed it Trinitarian. And that's definitely going on in this passage. The Holy Spirit, who is in us, is interceding for us. Would, so when Abraham or Moses or David prays before Pentecost, before the Spirit has been poured out, were they doing Trinitarian prayer?
Are you asking me?
You
or are you
opened
asking
it.
the
I
group?
don't know, man. I feel like Sam's got something to say.
I don't have
already.
anything to say.
I don't believe you.
Come on, Old Testament
I'm not
guy.
the guy for it.
Weigh in on that.
Okay, everyone's looking at me. Let me
Yes, we are.
make a comment. There is such a thing as a cosmic reality is too complex for us to understand. So even what we just read about how the Spirit is interfacing with God the Father and how the Son is interfacing with God at the right hand, it's metaphor for our benefit. We don't understand how this works precisely. This is analogy. And so the Trinitarian analogy becomes very appropriate after Jesus' baptism and our realization that God exists in these three persons and that they are in perfect community and unity. And before you have that method to draw from to describe what's occurring in prayer, you wind up with other analogies, some of which the New Testament takes up, things like high priest intercession and those sorts of things. And so I don't know that the Old Testament prayers, those who are doing prayer as a spiritual discipline, understood themselves to be joining a conversation with the Trinity. I'm holding that up as a New Testament expression of a cosmic reality that addresses what I think is the underlying question. What on earth do we think we are doing going toward infinite deity with our problems? Why in any realm do we think we have any right to do that or any ability to do it? And Paul is expressing this as part of his victorious posture. We have this posture in part because of this conversation occurring among the Trinity, and you get to join in on that.
Yeah, I think, the reality of that something new is available to us because Christ died for us and was seated at the right hand of God to intercede for us. We were not in that relationship with God before Christ. We as the heirs of Israel, we have something Abraham doesn't. And we have the Spirit in a way that Abraham didn't. We definitely have in the Old Testament, the Spirit comes upon people, and they, like Saul when he first gets anointed with the Spirit, and he's prophesying. He's communicating with God, right? That would probably be in our definition of prayer. Mm-hmm. And so the Spirit definitely is activated in some prayers in the Old Testament, right? But I think it's worth at least pointing out that this is a characteristic of Christian prayer, which is something more, which is not to downplay Old Testament prayer or that God would listen. But we are in, Hebrews talks about, I think in chapter 6, that, it's impossible to be restored again to repentance, those who have tasted the newness and the goodness of the new age, to be restored, right? There's something we're tasting when we're doing prayer in Trinitarian fashion, like you talked about, that our great ancestors of the faith, they longed for that. They looked forward to be able to pray like we can pray. And that's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, it's at Joel 2:28-32, where I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. All flesh did have that privilege, but now we're living in this wonderful age where God has fulfilled that promise to us. And so all of us being filled with the Spirit, the Old Testament people of God long for that day. Man, I'd give anything to be filled with the Spirit the way you guys are. And so it's a wonderful, joyful privilege that we have.
This makes me think there's a distinction between biblical prayer and Christian prayer, because the Bible is an unfolding, developing story where our role in it, especially as Gentiles, right, has changed because of Jesus. And our proximity to the Father in prayer has changed because of the Holy Spirit. So maybe we're talking about Christian prayer in particular.
Sure.
And we could then maybe do a dissection of Old Testament prayer or Old Covenant prayer might have different characteristics. What do you think, Sam?
I think it's so no understanding of Jesus or the Spirit in the way that Christians have. It'd be hard to put that back on them. But I will say, God does seem to respond to them.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, however it happens,
Right.
God seems to listen and respond. And we see multiple examples of that in the Old Testament. And so of course, they had no concept of Jesus interceding at the right hand of God. That was not part of their framework. But nonetheless, God listened, heard, and responded. And they had faith that he would.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was trying to address with my first response is nothing we're saying is about trying to invalidate the efficacy of Hebrew prayer before Jesus arrived.
Right.
But what John is pointing out is actually, it's a great segue right into our next passage, which is that there has been a fundamental change. And one of the things that John pointed out is the fundamental change includes the presence of the Holy Spirit. But that fundamental change is described in a different way later in Hebrews 10. We've got a great passage to set us up to describe that fundamental change, which again employs another metaphor, but I'll let the text speak for that.
So I'll read that one. Hebrews 10:19-22. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the sanctuary by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh. And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us approach with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. That's kind of interesting, kind of going in like the high priest. That's a cool metaphor that the author of Hebrews brings up, whoever he or she may be.
I mean, yes, because it brings in now the metaphor is like before the Romans was like, so we talk to the Spirit and the Spirit groans and Jesus is up there, but now we're actually walking into the place. We're not going through multiple people. Jesus has already done that, so now we can actually come before the actual throne of God. The comparison to the temple / tabernacle, coming to the most holy place where the ark was, and God's presence there above it. Like before, we could not. Now we can. And you said the high priest was the only one once a year, and now we can just stroll right in as though we own the place.
I like that. That's a great image.
But clearly not physically.
Clearly not physically.
So in what sense?
Spiritually.
What are you asking me?
Metaphysically.
Like is our prayers going there? Is that what's going there on our because Christ has cleared a pathway? Our prayers have a channel through him to get to the Father. Yeah. But then that makes me wonder about what about Abraham? Did he got through without the path?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, going back to your original question, the author of Hebrews is talking about the heavenly sanctuary. And so it's not like we're physically walking in someplace, like throwing the doors open and brazenly walking in like we own the place. But it's this idea that Jesus has gone to the true sanctuary, almost Platonic as we've talked about before, but this ideal sanctuary that is where you want everything to take place. Now there really is a way open to God. And instead of having to go through a physical tent and priests and all that, we've got the perfect priest offering up his blood, which is perfect, which opens up this way. And so that's like, I feel like I'm answering the question you asked. Like, we're not going into a physical sanctuary, but we're going into the presence of God in a more authentic and literal sense.
And the Hebrews author is responding to something. Like, there must be Christians in his congregations that he's addressing, or her. If Dan's right, and it's Priscilla.
Good catch.
But there must be a sense in which there was a perception that, we need the tabernacle and sanctuary for our prayers to be able to get to God.
Well, I think that...
Do we face Jerusalem to pray because that's where the building is, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's... So maybe that was the gateway that the Hebrews author is trying to say, no, Jesus is that. And you just need him. You don't need to face Jerusalem. You don't need to get to a space for it to happen. Jesus made that unnecessary.
Well, I think that the Hebrews still saw the tabernacle, or later the temple, as a place where you do encounter God. You're not going to encounter him out on the roads or in another town, but wherever the tabernacle is, that's where God comes to meet with us. It's the tent of meeting. And the temple would be the same way. And I think the author of Hebrews is saying, no, that's not the way it is anymore. We don't have to go to a specific location or, like you said, John, pray in a specific direction. That the way has been opened up to us in the ultimate dwelling place of God. And so we don't have to think about these physical spaces anymore, that we have an open path to God through Jesus. And that's a great blessing because it really embraces that idea of the priesthood of believers. We have a great high priest in the form of Jesus, but we're all priests who can now enter into the sanctuary, and there's no restriction on who gets to or who's forbidden, at least among the people of God.
And when you consider the veil or the curtain, depending on the translation, it's like, is the curtain designed to keep God trapped inside, or is the curtain designed to keep people from brazenly strolling in? These negative words that we've used, those notions of thinking you're entitled to go into the sanctuary when you're definitely not because there's a curtain in the way, those are dispelled by two words in Hebrews. Earlier in Hebrews 4, when this argument gets kicked off, the word is boldness. You enter the throne with boldness, and then here it's confidence. And so it's not brazen like I belong here because I'm so star-spangled awesome, I belong here.
Kicking the door down and all that, yeah.
Right. It's that the work of Christ removed the barrier that prevents you from getting in here. And now you come in here because you're invited.
I like that. You're invited. I like that a lot.
I'm on a whole other. You're fine. My mind's gone elsewhere. It's not germane to this conversation, so I will refrain.
Are you thinking about like disc golf already? Have you already gone to?
No, I'll tell you
Theologically.
we don't have to. So we see. We don't want. It's all right. So the curtain did separate two sections,
Right.
but the interaction with God did not happen until incense was offered. And the incense created this liminal state to which the priest could interact with God. And so I was thinking about how all that works together with what prayer is like. So we've taken, the incense isn't even mentioned here. Now suddenly the curtain's open, it's a free-for-all. Well, yes, but where's the incense? Where's the fact that God, now are we able to actually, is God in the flesh, so to speak, where we can encounter him? Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
So Jesus is the curtain, the Spirit is the incense.
That's
In Revelation,
I mean, it's possible.
In Revelation, the incense is the prayers of the saints.
Right. Well, yes. Anyway, so
Let's confuse us. Even
that's what
more.
I'm saying. So when you ask the question,
Right.
how do we actually come before the throne of God, and not physically? It's a metaphor that breaks down because we don't. But he says with a pure heart, with a clear conscience, all these sorts of things. And so there's this other state that it's happening, not actually physically. I'm just trying to wrap my head around all the different metaphors that are at play and the different threads that are breaking down as you keep going. So that's all.
Perhaps one of the metaphors we need to bring to bear here is relying on the actual occasion of Jesus' crucifixion, where the literal curtain is torn.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is in some ways trumping sort of the practicality of what exactly is going on in the tent of meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, do you all remember how that veil tore? We're going to capitalize on that in order to make a point about what God was trying to communicate to us through that. So in this instance, the ripping of the veil becomes a prophetic message to God's people that says, come on in. Don't, not cavalier or not but you're welcome here. Anyway, this is an interpretive choice I'm making, but proposing, it's a callback to the Gospels, I think.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I'm agreeing. I'm with all that. I just am trying to figure out how incense fits in. That's what I said.
Right.
I got distracted easily.
Somebody else is listening going, Sam, I'm right there with you. Feeling the same frustration. you're
Aaron,
feeling.
it's probably Aaron.
Probably more than one, yeah.
All right, next up, Todd.
Well, it seems like we've got a kind of Christian prayer, this conversation with the Trinity. We've established that we are allowed to enter the holy place because God has invited us in. And those are metaphors sort of stacked on metaphors. But to get eminently practical, there's no better place to go maybe than the Sermon on the Mount to start talking about how to pray. And I'm very, very fond of this chapter, partially because of how much it hurts and how difficult it is to read. But did you have a comment you want to make first?
No, I was going to say, do you want to do the reading so you can pause when you want to pause, or do you want me to do what you've laid out here?
If you feel comfortable doing that. I mean, it's not just that small comment is all. Yeah, that's fine.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
And I don't know. I get stuck every time I hear people, we get to enter the presence of God. I just always get hung up there. And I think what's, in Hebrews, it's our words go up into the presence of God. Our speech, our petitions, our requests. That's what's going. We're not going. We're not going like the priests in the Old Testament did. We're not going the way Moses did. Our words are. I think Hebrews is talking about. We enter the throne room with confidence on our knees in prayer. So our groanings, our words, that's what's going. Anyway.
I agree with you, but at the same time, I wonder if the Hebrew writer is trying to make us feel special like those guys did, who actually did get into the presence of God. And yes, obviously we're not, but now, I don't know, now we have this relationship. I don't know, that makes us feel special.
well, then I think later in Hebrews where he talks about the mountain and our God is a consuming fire.
Sure.
And there are later passages in Hebrews that scare us back out of that room.
Oh, right. back out, head down.
Yeah. But you're right. There's some, there's a difference through Christ that is an exalted way in. But I still think it's verbally.
Yes.
Yeah. Verbal intro. Okay. Sorry. You're bringing up good stuff that's making us think, and we're doing it on the fly. So,
No, it's quite
that's how we do our podcast, right?
This is how it works.
All right. Jesus' instructions, Matthew 6, verse 1. And this is like the preface you want us to read.
Yeah.
Beware of practicing your righteousness before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So thou shalt not do it like people who do it to be seen.
Yeah, there is a way to do righteous things wrongly. that's a foundational element of what then proceeds in chapter 6. Yeah.
All right. So after talking about how to do alms wrongly, he's going to, and then rightly, he's going to transition to prayer in verse 5. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then in this way: Our Father in heaven, may your name be revered as holy. May your kingdom come. May your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us into the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses.
A lot of stuff this calls to mind, I think. Maybe to focus our attention a little bit, just to give a really quick, usually fairly humorous aside that comes up in class. The first thing to notice is like the very few words, and don't try to manipulate God by using the correct combination of words. I will always call Harry Potter to mind and start saying Expelliarmus and waving my arm around like I know how to cast spells or something, and try and get the students thinking in terms of what does it mean to organize and order your words in such a way that you convince a being or a power higher than yourself to do something. It's a spell. Like it's casting a magic spell, which Ron early on pointed out that's not what prayer is. That's not what prayer is for. So it seems like the Gentiles in part are guilty of trying to manipulate cosmic forces beyond themselves. And the warning is, don't do that. Sort of a remember your place, sort of moving back to, John's caution about us thinking that we can just be in the holy place. That's not where we are, right? That's not who we are. We have an invitation, but we don't take advantage of that invitation by trying to put ourselves in the driver's seat. And that seems to be an orienting warning before then going into here's how you pray and offering the Lord's Prayer. The warning is let your words be few, kind of that Ecclesiastes sort of posture.
Well, I mean, that leads to one of my favorite stories in Acts is the sons of Sceva and them trying to utilize all sorts of things to control the gods/God to then control these spirits. And then the demon's like, nah, I don't think we're going to do that. And they beat the crap out of them, send them out bruised and naked. It's a fantastic story, right? But it's exactly what you say. Like, there was this mentality, like, if we can only get the right words and the right combination, anytime they found a new spell, might say, or deity to draw upon, we're going to try to include that because we need all the power we can get. And Jesus is like, yeah, that's not how it's supposed to happen. And so you make a great point that it's not about these empty phrases. It's about a posture of coming before God because he already knows what you need. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need to be convinced by you getting the spell right? He already knows.
And I've seen that. I've, with my own eyes, watched people who are trying to do that very thing. And this is what turned me off in certain Christian circles where they believe that you got to pray a certain way. And boy, you got to get those words right. Because if you do, it's like putting your coin in the vending machine and getting the candy bar you want, like you said earlier, Todd. And they're convinced that this is how you have to pray. And I began to realize, oh my gosh, we're falling into that same trap that the pagans fall into. This is not what godly prayer looks like. This is not what Christian prayer looks like. And so my heart goes out to Christians who believe that it is some kind of a magical spell. And if you get the words right, it'll happen the way you want it to. Because this is definitely what Jesus is trying to turn us away from.
So we're going to talk about how you're supposed to do it, like go in your room. So public prayer and churches is wrong.
No public prayer. Stop that. Stop that.
Well, it's definitely a provocative question to bring
Sure.
up in class and have students go, wait a minute, I've been asked to pray over things and it feels like a great honor. And what role does this teaching play in something like corporate prayer or whatever? As we're focusing on the personal spiritual discipline of prayer as Foster does as well. But that's a very important question to understand. What is it specifically that's wrong about how the quote unquote the hypocrites are doing it that Jesus is trying to forbid? And does that catch every instance of public prayer or prayer where someone else can overhear your words?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be the corporate prayer. Like standing on a street corner praying is, you only do that because you want to post to your TikTok, right? There's these days there's no reason to do that other than that, right? And so people can see you, and that's missing the point. I think that's more what he's addressing rather than corporate prayer, because there's this expectation. There are communal psalms and prayer. Like, this is what we do. We do this life together, but you don't just go out randomly like, all right, everyone, pay attention. I'm about to pray. Like, no, this is not our faith community. You're not doing it. And so I think, definitely addressing that, where no, you can't be doing that. In fact, go in your room. No one needs to be seeing you doing that. God's the one who should be caring about it.
Yeah. My mind always goes to Daniel. Like, when the king does an edict that no one shall pray to anyone but the king, and he like flings open the doors and prays so everyone can see him, right? It's almost like, if you're tempted to like pray in order to be seen by others, and it's not about talking to God, then you should do it in private. But when the powers that be are trying to make you invisible, make your prayer and your worship invisible, then fling open the doors to do it. It seems like a balancing thing. Like, there is a time and place to be seen, but not the way the people Jesus is talking about are trying to be seen.
Yeah, and those prayers could have been done in private. What you're doing on the street corner, you could just as easily have done that in private. And it would have been better because it would have been between you and God. And he would have been happy to see you pray that way and reward you. But now you're not about God. You just want the applause. And fine, here's your applause, here's your reward. Enjoy it, because it's going to be gone the moment you walk away. So yeah, there's a very big distinction.
Yeah, and I often apply this practically as well. Just sort of the simple distinction: who are you talking to? Like, who are you intending to benefit from your words? And there's a more imminent risk, I think, in our corporate gatherings when somebody stands up and prays, but the prayer is actually just a second sermon.
Oh, love those.
Oh, yeah.
It's an announcement, or even in worst cases, and I've seen this, unfortunately, it's self-aggrandizement.
Oh, right.
Thank you that I'm not like this tax collector or whatever.
Yeah.
Very much, I was able to do these amazing things, and thank you for blessing me in these ways. Like, wait a minute, who are you talking to?
Yeah.
If you're talking to the group and the group is going, wow, look at the impressive things you've done, that seems to fall right in line with Jesus' warning. You've received your reward. They admire you now. Good job. I don't think you were talking to God.
I love the prayer as announcement. Like, God, please bless our Easter egg hunt, April 15th, 2:00. Everyone bring 15 eggs to hand.
Yes.
Oh, man, that is great.
I have some practical questions whenever we get there.
I think we're there. Take it away.
So this has to do with a little bit what you brought at the very beginning, John, I think, about the difference between prayers, right? Where there are certain prayers for certain times. And I just wonder what the discipline of prayer looks like, where sometimes it's not. So if the discipline is a regular thing that we do, right, to work on our spiritual muscles, right? So where does, yes, I'm in trouble, I need God prayer come in, and where does the prayers of the hours come in? And all these other various Christian history things that happen, like went to a monastery and they have regular prayers at different times throughout the day, and they do that every day. And so, like, where does all that come together and fit in, and what's the benefit of all of that?
We're remarkably short on time, I'm noticing. We take 2 classes on this in Christian faith. It might be worth noting that. But simply put, it's relationship with a living God who is alive and present and involved. And so the things that you talk about with people you're in relationship with are often dictated by circumstances. When we sit down for this podcast, we understand we've got this focused conversation happening, and that's a bit like what the daily offices are like. There's an opportunity for us to sit and focus on a topic or focus through a meditation, maybe even that's been supplied by someone else. This is an act of discipline. It's a spiritual discipline to commit myself to this act. And then there's other times when we're overwhelmed, and as the psalmist would say, your waves batter me, sort of I'm getting beaten against the rocky crag of the cliff face, and I just don't know what to do or how to even talk about it. So I'm just going to sort of yell and shout and groan like the Spirit. That prayer is just as appropriate under our umbrella. Prayer is communication with God. That prayer is just as appropriate as it's being informed by the circumstances that we're experiencing. When we're quite comfortable and experiencing the lavish, abundant life that Jesus promised and the blessings that God is pouring out, I don't know that we need to contrive a reason to lament. It's just appropriate to be blessed, to be thankful, to be celebratory in those occasions. And when that era ends, as it inevitably typically I should say, does, we then have lament in our pocket, because that's a way that we talk to someone we're in relationship with.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a disconnect, because a lot of times we would love for our relationship with God to be very organic. Like, you regularly see your friends and you hang out and you do all those things. And that's kind of how we frame prayer. Well, that's not how our relationship with God typically is, at least in my experience. And so for me, it's more like I am crazy, busy, and distracted. And so I know that every Monday night at 6 o'clock, I'm calling my parents. That's a regular thing I do. Right? It's not actually. I should, but I know that it's part of my schedule, and there's nothing.
You heard that, Margaret?
She's a regular listener. I'm sorry, I'll call out more often, Mom. Right? But there's value in that, and yes, it's not organic and Hallmark movie-y, but it's important because it's this time where, like you say, we're focused on this thing where other things could have distracted us, and there will be plenty of times for the happenstance run into the person / God and talk to him. But I think these times that are often poo-pooed because they're not as kind of cool as these as randomly encountering God are vital. And for me, the discipline part, that's where it comes in, where I do that to get good at it, to get focused on God, so that when the random part comes on, like it's very casual, and that's what we do. This is our interaction with God. It's our communication dialogue with God, and it is natural, and it's not forced or uncomfortable.
Yeah, that reminds me of where we started earlier in talking about the Acts passage and the apostles. They couldn't, there's certain things they just couldn't do because they know they need to devote time to prayer and the word. And I think about, why we would pray regularly is because we need God. Like the life he's called us to, the kingdom first life, you just need him for, like you need food and like you need sleep. And so you plan on it because you plan to eat, and sometimes you eat organically, and sometimes you eat with people. Like the meals change, but you plan a regular diet because you need it. And if we really do need God in our life for our life to make sense, some kind of planning, I think, is necessary.
Yeah.
I cut you off when you were going to say something.
No. I was just leaning in, but I didn't have something to say. I appreciate how sensitive you were there, John. That means a lot to me.
I'm really growing as a person.
Do we have anything else, or we have to I think we have to cut it off here because we are out of time.
There's certainly always more to say, but
if you want to bring us closure, like parting thoughts from Todd. I mean, you open us up, you can bring us home.
The Psalms are an example of what I believe is to be thought of as the reality that I am allowed to say just about anything to God. In my personal spiritual discipline known as prayer, God can handle what I'm bringing to the table. That doesn't mean that I won't sometimes need to loop back around and say, God, I'm sorry that I talked to you that way. I think that's also appropriate. Yeah. But there's not a sense that we can scare God away from the largeness of our feelings or our circumstances. And so I would encourage everyone listening, feel liberated to be open and direct with a God who already knows. You're not bringing news. You're bringing your authentic self. And when you pray out of that posture, I think that's when you really encounter God and learn a lot about God and yourself.
All right. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, listeners, for joining us for another episode of the After Class podcast.
After class, because
the best conversations happen
after class.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the After Class podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Audio editing and mixing is done by Drew Nyquist. Episode images and descriptions are provided by Darren Harris.